Hey, yo, it's me, Pops Van Marmalade, and you're watching the Comics-Related Madness Network. Uh-huh. So come get some. CromCon. CromCon.
Your favorite podcast is Critical Blast.
Hello, Internet. This is a show on Tuesday. I'm your host, Tim TK, and I'm joined, as always, by Mr. Jose Fuentes.
Hello.
And a special guest, Madeleine Holly-Rosing.
Hi.
Yes.
Sorry for the half gloves. It's getting chilly in here.
That's all right. I was told that spring was supposed to happen at some point, but it's still snowing and 40 degrees up here in Oregon, so...
Oh, yeah, and it's raining here in Southern California.
Yeah, that's great.
Where it never rains.
I completely feel for you guys. It's like 70 outside.
Mr. Florida, yeah. Yes.
Well, I actually don't feel
today.
too bad. We need the rain. I know
Mhm.
it's causing problems for people, but we need the rain. So
Right.
Yeah.
I'm not complaining.
I lived in San Diego for a little bit, and that was always the consensus whenever we got those hailstorms was, well, it's suffering, but I mean, it helps with the drought, I guess.
Yeah, it's close enough. It's
Yeah.
close enough.
Yeah.
It melts.
Exactly,
You know,
yeah.
helps maybe get into the water table, things like that.
A little bit, yeah. Anyway, so for those of you who, or for those of our audience who might be unfamiliar, can you introduce yourself, what you might be known for, kind of what you've had to come out recently?
Sure. I am the writer-creator of the Steampunk Supernatural prose, audio drama, and graphic novel series, Boston Metaphysical Society. And for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's about an ex-Pinkerton detective, a spirit photographer, and a genius scientist who battles supernatural forces in late 1800s Boston. We started with a 6-issue miniseries that went to trade with art by Emily Hugh. I call that Volume 1 now. And then we did 4 standalone sequels with art by Gwen Tavares. And those are all compiled into what we call Volume 2. And now currently on Kickstarter, we have our next 4-issue miniseries called Mystery at Pikes Peak.
Okay, very cool. So you said this is a steampunk world set in the late 1800s Boston. And how deep into the steampunk aesthetic do you go? Are we talking skyships or Tesla coils? Perhaps speaking as someone who's read some of the series. How much technology do we end up introducing, or weird technology end up introducing into this version of Boston?
Well, it's more steampunk-ish than what I would call hardcore steampunk. The gadgets that we have are organic to the world, but the story is never about the gadgets.
Okay.
It's always about the people and it's about their relationships. And so, yeah, you will see airships in the background because it is part of their world. They do, Granville Woods, our genius scientist, does put together some cool weapons at some point. So you do have some fun steampunk elements in there. I do try to put real science in whenever I can, just because for those who know, it's kind of fun to go through and go like, wait, that's right, that's real.
Yes.
And but sometimes the story has to take precedence. So, it is fictional. It is an alternate history with steampunk elements in it, in a very different, well, seemingly similar but very different, what I call great states of America. It is definitely an alternate history.
Definitely. And perhaps running parallel to that, you do have these supernatural or paranormal elements. One of the main characters being a young medium. So what was kind of inspiration for melding those two elements together, and perhaps not just going straight into the Mr. Neural Jonathan Strange paranormal alternate history and not going strictly into steampunk, but combining paranormal and steampunk in your history here?
Well, it's probably because I'm a huge history and science fiction fan.
There you go.
And I do love paranormal elements. So putting that all together was, for me, it was just fun. And I could say that one of the kernels of inspiration came from X-Files. But I asked a question, what if we put a Mulder and Scully in the late 1800s, where they didn't have access to modern technology? But no aliens. I don't do aliens.
Sure.
But they have to investigate the paranormal, but without, the FBI, without any of governmental agencies, without any of the support that, Mulder and Scully did have on occasion, and have that kind of dynamic, but what would be more socially appropriate during that time period. The Boston Metaphysical Universe is extremely hierarchical, and the social stratums they're very fixed. And the only person in the story who kind of crosses over is Samuel Hunter, who is the ex-Pinkerton detective. And the only reason he could do that was that he married into a great house. Mm-hmm. And because of that, he clearly had certain advantages and insight, but he came from the middle district, which is middle class type of neighborhood. So he kind of straddles that, but is yet not really accepted in either, because he married into one, but he came from the other. But oh, you know, he may be married to one, but he really came from over there. And so he has a different dynamic that he has to deal with. While Caitlin definitely comes from poor working class, medium, you know, who she is accepted, not accepted in their world. And Granville T. Woods is, who, by the way, is a historical figure himself. If you don't already know that, he was an African American scientist who lived during the same time period as Tesla and Edison and, you know, Westinghouse and the rest. And he's accepted within his own community, but being an African American man, yeah, he also has trouble going across those barriers. And what Samuel has done, literally because of his privilege, he created a space where outliers like Caitlin and Granville could thrive. And the three of them together, he recognizes that they all have their strengths, but a lot of times he's the one who makes the final decision. Think of them as Kirk, Spock, and McCoy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then later on, in the second standalone sequel, Spirit of Rebellion, I introduce a new character by the name of Alma Bryant, who eventually becomes part of the team as well.
Very cool. Yeah, even in the first issue, you immediately get into noticing these elements of social structure, which are baked into the world at the time. And your dialogue presents it very naturally, but you immediately notice, because Caitlin's a woman, she has these inherent hurdles to get over, and because Granville is African American, he also has these hurdles. And there's a moment of subversion where Caitlin talks to Granville, and they have this brief, sweet interaction that also does a lot.
That moment, yeah.
That does a lot for world building. So between historical socioeconomics, the supernatural, and technology, I imagine that there must have been a lot of world building that went into all of this. Can you describe some of that process for us?
Well, it's been ongoing over the years. And one of the things I did when we were in production for the original 6-issue miniseries is that while Emily was doing pages, I was writing short stories. And I was using that to build the universe, to build canon, and to help me essentially in developing everything. And so I would do short stories about, say, the characters in their younger years, or supporting characters in different times of their lives. A fan favorite is a novella called Steampunk Rat, which is in the anthology Prelude. And that's about, it's basically a YA rite of passage about Jonathan Weldsmore, who was Samuel's father-in-law, who became Samuel's father-in-law during an important period of his life, where he had found an injured rat, and because of his engineering skills, was able to construct mechanical arms and legs, and he trained the rat. And but his grandmother, who was head of the house, which was somewhat unusual for the time, the great House Weldsmore, did not approve of this at all, and didn't really approve of him. But I don't want to give away spoilers because it's
Sure. Yeah.
But Beatrice Weldsmore actually comes back. I really liked her as a character, and I have on the back burner that I've been trying to get back to a trilogy of novels that are set 35 years prior to the original graphic novel, which she's one of the main characters in. And it takes place during the House Wars, which is my equivalent of the American Civil War.
Okay. That's cool.
So, I mean, what's nice about everything I do is a standalone, but if you read everything, it just enriches the world for you, because you'll if you've read the prequel novel and then you read Spirit of Rebellion, you'll meet a character there and you'll go like, oh, I remember him. That's where he ended up after all of that happened before. So now I know where he went and things like that. So it's fun.
That's pretty cool. I imagine that also makes it a having that separate but connected approach makes it easier also on your brain space when you're trying to memorize dates or technology and what the parallel would be in your universe. So going from this story is related to this timeline. Okay, so I can forget about the same that happens 5 years later.
Yeah, I mean, it's, not everything is exactly, but to me, it's close enough within the range of when, these things happened, and in comparison between my fictional world and the real world.
Right.
And there should be some slight differences, because the Boston metaphysical world basically split off from the timeline that we know of during the War of 1812.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, that was my split off point.
Very cool.
And though most American history texts will say that we won the war, we actually did not. We lost it to the British. Just no one likes to say that.
Well, it's not just the British, but specifically the Canadian regiments too.
Oh man.
Oh, yeah.
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 Don't say that line on was it the Sunday stream?
The Sunday show, yeah.
Because Pete will never let us live it down. Peter Clinton is one of the artists for Silverline, and he's a fellow classmate from the Cuber School with me, and he's British. So,
He's impeccably British. But yeah.
Yeah. So during that split off, instead of going the way that as we know it, the families with the most power and the money just essentially decided, hey, we can't this is too humiliating. We need to centralize everything. We can't allow something like this to happen again. And so they gradually started eroding civil rights. So the everyday people didn't get to vote anymore. All the voting rights went to the great houses, the industrial families, and they elected Congress through the great families, and then Congress would elect a president within then. So even in my House Wars book, Abraham Lincoln is still the president, but he was elected through his house.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, through his family connections.
That's very cool.
that's cool, yeah.
Yeah. So in the process of building out this world, did you find that hitting on these social issues that are a broad scope like that, and then also what feels very granular in the case of the things that personally affect Caitlin and Granville, do you find that became very important for you as you're developing the story, or is that something that just naturally worked its way into the story, not necessarily as an afterthought, but have you already worked on it and found that this worked its way in, or was that something that you thought of at the forefront?
Well, I think it just worked its way in naturally, because these are the issues that matter to me.
Yeah.
But I also don't like to lecture about them, and, because that's boring and that's just bad storytelling. But if the characters are having to deal with these things and how they react, and respond, and, sometimes they're successful and sometimes they're not.
Yeah.
I mean, Caitlin is a young woman who is constantly pushing the envelope, but sometimes the envelope pushes back, and there are consequences for her actions. And that goes for all of the characters. And, sometimes they can move the line a little bit, and sometimes, yeah. Absolutely.
So you had already mentioned before that you had a love of history and science fiction before this. Can you kind of speak to that? What works you found influenced you, and how long you've had this love of reading the genre or working in genre.
Well, it probably started since I could read. I think one of the first books my mother read to me was A Wrinkle in Time by Madeleine Holly-Rosing.
Yes.
So, and my brother, who's older than I am, had a huge sci-fi collection. So I would go in and read his books from, a lot of Edgar Rice Burroughs, and I'm trying to think. I've read a lot. And I remember reading Tarzan. I had to stop reading Tarzan for a while because it just got too violent. But I really enjoyed, John Carter of Mars,
Yep.
the whole
The
Barsoom
series.
Oh yeah, I mean, who doesn't want a Thark as a best friend? I mean, come on,
I drew a Thark.
come on. I love Tharks. I mean, isn't that in public domain now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I thought so because I keep seeing stuff about like, oh, the Queen of Mars, da da da, and Amy Chu wrote a beautiful 2-volume series on the origins of Dejosaurus.
Nice.
Which was great. But I keep thinking, it's like, oh, it's in public domain. I wonder if I should write a Thark story.
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
The answer is yes.
Yes.
Good. And I've started pitching around a Winnie the Pooh meets Interview with a Vampire story since that entered public domain.
Oh yeah, and then there's a Kickstarter on now about Winnie the Pooh Demon Hunter.
Yes.
Which I thought was
is.
hysterical. It's hysterical. I even wrote the guy, said this is hysterical. I love this.
Good.
Because it's just, I mean, why not?
Yeah, absolutely. That's this really kind of into our tangent space that we're known for.
Yes, these are tangents, but they're fun tangents.
They're different tangents, but yeah, that's also one of the reasons why I love comics as a medium, is that even though it is entirely an art form, it should be respected. You can be much more wacky than I feel like traditional publishing will let you get away with. And you can include much more weird stuff than film will let you get away with because you don't have a special effects budget.
And it's a smaller budget, so there's less on the line.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
If you're trying to do a show, either whether it be animated, TV, or even a movie, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And if you can just, keep it lean and mean with like a writer and an artist, and if your artist can do the coloring as well, and it's a lot cheaper to do the weird stuff as a comic than I think probably any visual medium I should qualify.
Absolutely. And I find the audience is also generally pretty accepting that, having spent the last 80 years reading about men in tights. So you're all for that weird stuff. So speaking of lean and mean teams and funding that, you are kind of notorious for having a rather sizable amount of successful, or numerical amount of successful Kickstarters. So how many Kickstarters have you run to date?
This one will be number 12, though it'll say 11 in the box, and that's because when I did the audio drama, I did it under my corporate name.
Okay.
Which is actually Queen of Mercia LLC. So yes, I've watched the Vikings, and also the Last Kingdom. And for those of you out there who know Uhtred, son of Uhtred, yeah.
Yes. Yes. Vikings has been a hate and love relationship for me. Part of my background was doing historical papers in late Rome to early Dark Ages. So covering the age of the Vikings is part of that. Like, it show's so cool. There's so many things that get wrong, but I love it.
No, they do. But what is fun is like when the first series of Vikings was on with Ragnar,
Mhm.
it makes you curious, like, okay,
Absolutely.
who was when what, and then you go and you do a little research and you see how they compressed and they moved people around, and you know how Rollo actually was in France and Paris, and
Yeah.
like, okay, well that part was right, but the timing was all wrong, and
Yes.
Ragnar actually lived during a slightly different, 20 or 30 years earlier or later, something like that. But I can understand why they would do that to make the show work and make it dramatic. So
Absolutely. I mean, trying to take the sagas one to one with TV would be difficult.
yeah,
So the compressions definitely helped to go quite a bit better. Um,
yeah.
Speaking of which, I believe you also said that you had started the developing Boston Metaphysical Society as a script for TV while you're in film school.
Yes, that's true. It was originally a TV pilot.
Okay.
I actually wrote the TV pilot and one other episode. I had a class where specifically the instructor said, you need to write the 5th episode of your TV series. And the reason for that was if you could actually write a 5th episode, your show had legs.
Mm-hmm.
And so the 5th episode was The Ghost Ship. And so I adapted that script into the audio drama.
Ah.
And it really was an adaptation, because there's basically just the kernel, the basic premise of the story remained, but everything else changed because you were going from a visual to a strictly audio medium.
Right.
And everything I could have done in the visual medium, I just like, it wasn't working in the audio. So there was a lot of things I had to change, and which was fun. I enjoy working in different mediums because it exercises my brain differently, and I like to learn new things. So
definitely. Yeah. And when you were transitioning or adapting the rest of this into a graphic novel or a comic series, how did that process go for you? Did you find yourself having to seek additional education on writing comics, or was it something you just kind of flew by seat of your pants?
No. Actually, before I started adapting the TV pilot, I did take sequential art classes. So I did go and learn how to write a comic. And as you probably both know, film scripts, TV scripts, and comic scripts, they're similar.
Mm-hmm.
They're both visual writing, but the pacing is different. How you do the dialogue is different. How you manipulate. I do many drafts, and particularly as art comes in, so I'm changing dialogue. I'm shifting it because I don't want to screw up beautiful art.
Yes.
You don't want to cover up something
as an
beautiful.
artist. That's greatly appreciated.
Yeah.
Like, okay, let's just like, okay, no, I can move this line here over here, and that's going to work because that way that'll show and that'll look beautiful. So it's a different process. Absolutely. But yeah, the only thing I adapted was that TV pilot, which became the original 6-issue miniseries. Everything else was original stories that, I'd completely moved on by then. So
very cool.
So everything just kind of came out of the original 6 issues. And I know Tesla in the original 6 issues didn't really have a good ending for me. So I had already planned what the first standalone sequel would be, and that would be to finish off the Tesla arc for that story, which is The Scourge of the Mechanical Men. And that features Granville and Tesla. While at the same time, Samuel and Caitlin go to Philadelphia. So this Scourge of the Mechanical Men and Spirit of Rebellion actually, time-wise, happened at the exact same time, but they're in 2 different places.
Okay.
I kind of split up the team for a little bit because I wanted time to spend more time with the individual characters.
Absolutely.
Which the standalones allowed me to do.
Yeah. When you're working on that standalone, then did you find yourself referencing the other story to have Easter eggs or to reference or work within your own timeline, or did you work completely separate from that? As I've known writers who have done both, where if they have something that happens in the same timeline but in a different location, they'll try to have Easter eggs pop back and forth so the reader knows it's connected. Or they're like, well, I need to have them reconvene at this later point, so I'm going to remember what calendar date this is. Or did you just completely treat it like its own separate thing without necessarily having those references?
There are some little references, just so you know why Samuel and Caitlin didn't show up.
Mm.
You know, that this event happened, and Granville sent a note to like, hey, XYZ has happened, and he gets a note back saying we had to go to Philadelphia.
Sure.
And so you have a logical reason why they wouldn't show up, because normally if this particular thing happened, they would show up. So yeah, they needed to be somewhere else. So he knew they were somewhere else. And then they found out later what happened in Boston, after they came back.
Very cool. So before your first foray, what was your experience with comics before creating Volume 1? Did you have much of an experience at all, or was this something just kind of got recommended and you fell into?
Well, it's funny. Before Boston Metaphysical, I had very little contact with comics, except for the fact that my brother probably has one of the largest graded Daredevil collections in the country. But I don't think he actually ever read them. And superhero comics he just collected them, so they're all pretty.
Sure.
Don't even.
I know the type.
That hurts me a little bit. I just want to put that out there.
Yeah. But superheroes, it just didn't appeal. Nothing about it appealed to me. And so when it was suggested, well, the TV pilot kind of made the rounds and there was positive feedback, but this was before, steampunk really, it became mainstream. It was expensive to produce, and people saying, it'll find a home. It'll find a home. And then it was suggested I turn it into a graphic novel to use it to sell back to Hollywood. Well, a funny thing happened during this journey of mine, and that I decided I really like writing comics, and I really love being in the indie comic creator community. So I stayed.
That's awesome. Heck yeah.
And as someone reminded me last year, 2022 was our 10th anniversary.
Wow. Congratulations.
So yeah, I was like, okay, this is not where I expected to be 10 years ago.
Right, yes.
But part of that journey, when I was, like I mentioned to you, I was taking the sequential art classes. Of course, I had the syllabus and I had to go read stuff.
Yeah.
So, which I don't mind. But I have to tell you, I got really angry because these stories were so good and no one had ever told me about them before. It was like this whole other world that no one even mentioned.
Talking about comic stories in particular?
Well, I mean, in the beginning, it was like Why the Last Man, Astro City. I think there's a few others, then my husband has never been into graphic novels, but every once in a while I'll run across one. I'll go like, no, you're going to like this one.
Right.
And so I gave him like Lady Killer, which he loved, and then Ascender and Descender. So yeah, there's many more, of course, that escapes. A Saga, of course.
Great.
I wouldn't give him Saga. I think that'd just be too weird for him.
A little too much.
Yeah, I love Saga, but yeah, I think I think the computer, I think the monitors' heads would he'd be like, "What?
Yeah,
I don't understand. How does this work?" I said, you don't think about it that hard.
Exactly.
That's how it works.
There's definitely a wide gap between what is well, thanks to the MCU, become the mainstream of comics, the superhero, and I mean it's all art, but the more art house style comics that you find in independent stuff, and that's where you find a lot more of the emotionally rich or character deep stories that I found, and it's unfortunately, marketing money just isn't there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that happens. And marketing is extremely hard. I have an added advantage in that in a previous life, I was a marketing director.
There you go.
Which is helpful. But I mean, even that was a long time ago, and marketing has rapidly changed with social media.
Yes.
I mean, there's 10 years ago, I mean, that's like back in the dark ages when it comes to social media. So you constantly have to stay on top of all the changes and then make a decision like, okay, pick 2 social media, get good at those, and don't worry about the rest because you just don't have time.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. What have you perhaps some advice for your creators who are also entering the space? Learning how to market yourself, especially if you're working independent, is probably going to be the second most important skill right up there with your craft. What is some of your immediate concrete advice for those new creators?
Start doing cons, now that they're open again. You don't have to get a whole table. Share a table. That's how I started. A friend of mine for the first 2 years, we shared a table because we didn't have that much stuff to sell yet. And it saves you a bunch of money. You travel together. So, you save on gas and, treat each other, alternate treating each other to dinner and things like that. That saves you money. Get those postcards or bookmarks and get a mailing list on that table. Start building that email list. That email list is absolutely critical. And then start a newsletter. And it doesn't have to be every week. I just do mine once a month.
Mm-hmm.
And I give obviously the updates of what's going on with Boston Metaphysical, anything else I may be doing that I think they might be interested in. Like I wrote a story for Lady Mechanica, and so people are because that's a nice crossover demographic. So my people are going like, yeah, they're very interested in hearing what's going on with that. I do reviews for fan-based press, so I add those. And any kind of fun articles and where I'm going to be. And so on a Thursday afternoon when you're at work and you're tired of working, you can pull up the newsletter, spend 5 minutes just chilling, reading it, and move on with your life.
Mm-hmm.
And then people know what's going on, but their inbox isn't inundated.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's how I do it. Other people do it differently.
Absolutely.
I don't have time to do a newsletter more than once a month. So it's like, here it is.
Mm-hmm.
And actually it's going out tomorrow morning. I just finished it.
Oh, there you go. Cool. Well, now that you've been in the space for a little bit, do you find yourself over 10 years, do you find yourself reading more comics now? Or have you, as the trouble with some writers, not found the time to read other comics?
Well, that's one of the reasons why I do reviews for Fanbase is I do at least 2 reviews a month. So either it's something that they've sent out that needs to be reviewed, like I'm doing the series Hexware right now.
Yeah.
And then if there's something I'm not particularly interested, because I don't do like Ninja Turtles and yeah. I mean, I'll leave that to the Ninja Turtle people.
Yeah.
They love that, and that's wonderful. Or I dive into my Kickstarter pile and give one of the indies a review that otherwise probably wouldn't.
That's very cool. Yeah.
And that's a lot of fun. Finding ones that kind of get lost because they don't have any marketing money and things like that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, kind of going down the list here. So one of the things that makes comics different from traditional prose. Oh, Evan Sarah, you're welcome anytime. Thanks for coming in, Vic. Say here. One thing that's comics different from working in traditional prose and TV is the scale of team. Whereas in prose is maybe just you and an editor. Film and TV, you have a full crew. Comics, you get this happy medium of writer, illustrator, letterer, potentially a project editor, or maybe not, depending on the project. So what was your experience like finding a team and working with them for the first time?
Finding Emily for the first miniseries, that took a while. About a year. I went through a couple other artists that fell by the wayside or just decided it wasn't quite right. And fortunately for me, one of my classmates in one of my sequential art classes said, like, hey, there's this woman I know online. I think she would be a good for Boston Metaphysical. So she introduced us. I hired Emmy to do 2 audition pages. She knocked it out of the park. And then I signed her for the 6-issue miniseries. And bless her heart, about 5.5 years later, we were done.
Yeah.
And then she ran off to go be a storyboard artist for Warner Brothers and Nickelodeon and Marvel and
Sure, all the big houses.
and other places, which was great. I think she was like semi-famous, or probably still is, in the anime manga world. And my comic was her first crossover. And I don't think she's done anything else. I'm not sure she's interested in doing anything else because she's busy with her other life. And then with Gwen, at that point, I'd been in the community for 5 years or so. So I put the word out that I was looking for a female illustrator, artist. And a friend of mine at a small steampunk convention came to me and says, hey, I think I know someone who I think she'd be good. And so he gave me Gwen's name, and I said, yeah, I want to see her portfolio. And then Gwen contacted me, and I had her hired her to do some character stuff, and she nailed it. And we were off to the races. And she eventually did the 4 standalone sequels. And Elizabeth, this is no knock on Elizabeth, but yeah, I go through tons of portfolios, and there's people out there who are amazing, but they just don't quite capture what I'm looking for
Sure.
the Boston Metaphysical universe. And so I did go through a couple people. It didn't work out. Others said, like, hey, I'll be available in 2024. I'm like, no.
Right.
No, that's not, I wish you the best, but no. And others who came to me, and I looked at their work, and they just weren't, they were good, but they just weren't what I was looking for. And if you ask me, well, what do you look for? I'm not even sure I could enunciate that for you, because it's like something I have to see. It's almost a gut instinct.
Just got to vibe with you.
Well,
It's just a vibe of like, is this Boston Metaphysical?
Right.
And then I ran across Elizabeth, and she was always on my list, and I was always going back to her because I'd go like, what about them? And then I'd go, what about Elizabeth? I'd go like back to her, and then somebody here, and I'd be back to Elizabeth. And then I finally contacted her, and she said yes, she'd be interested, and we talked, and here we are. So she's, working on issue 2 right now.
Very cool.
I got pages today. I'm so excited.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So
it's like Christmas. Every time you get pages in, it's like Christmas.
I'm like, oh, 3 more pages. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it never. Well, you do kind of develop a sense of normalcy with it, but you never truly get used to seeing someone actually make your words into tangible art.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's true.
So how was that that first experience for you, learning how to communicate with an artist, and then also getting those pages back and seeing like, oh crap, someone's actually doing something with my words. And was there a moment where you had to learn the art of giving notes to a comic artist in the same way, you know, you might give notes in a script class or something like that?
Well, I mean, I was accustomed to giving notes to other writers and working with Emily as well. But it's really when you bring on a new artist, because with Gwen, after a time, we'd worked together for 4 years. You know, we had a shorthand by that time,
Right.
and it would actually be kind of funny because she would draw what would be a ghost, and then write a note and say like, okay, don't forget the glowy stuff.
Mhm.
Nice.
And she would know what the glowy stuff was. And, you know, without having me to explain. So, yeah, the glowy stuff. She goes, oh, yeah, I forgot the glowy stuff. So we developed a shorthand, but that takes time to develop. And with Elizabeth, you know, with her and with Katie, who's doing the coloring, because Gwen did her own coloring, but now I have a separate colorist. And so, yeah, you just have to initially you have to spend more time in communicating. But what I always do with all my artists, colorists, whomever, is like the door is always open. I will give you instructions. If you have questions, ask me. If you think there's a better way, tell me, because you're probably right. I mean, I remember one time Emily blew up a couple panels that I had written on a page, and she says, oh, I hope this is okay, but I decided to do this. And the page I got back, I said, this is freaking awesome. Of course, yes, we're staying with this. This is better.
Cool. Yes.
But I try to give my artists and colorists guidelines so they're just not floundering and wondering what they should do. But I also don't want to micromanage them, because I'm hiring them for a reason. They're the artists, they're the colorists.
Yeah.
And I know Katie and I, there's a page in issue 1 where Caitlin has a vision, and that would be the standard for her visions for the entire series. So we went through about 5 different iterations of that until we both settled. I said, okay, let's, you know, back and forth and whatever until, you know, come to agreement. Okay, this is what's going to work the best. But we had to go through those 5 iterations in order to come to that conclusion. So she understood what I was trying to say to her and why some iterations weren't going to work. And, you know, and this one was with little elements from over here. But now that work is done, so that's the standard for that particular scene that'll reflect through the entire series. So the reader will know, oh, we're in a vision. We're back in the vision. There's no question. We know where we are now.
Absolutely.
The stage has been set.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, there's, you know, within greater storytelling, there are tropes, but even then within your own individual stories, you have to define your own trope for the storytelling and the way it's presented visually that gives the reader their visual or narrative context that makes it work without necessarily doing exposition dumps every single scene.
Yeah.
So transitioning from artist to artist, obviously you have to find ways to make those tropes carry through, but the rest of the work is going to morph because it's another artist working on it, so they're going to be their own take on it. How was from a writer, that's also an interesting perspective, seeing their project almost take on a new skin.
Yeah.
So how when you made that transition, what was that like for you? How much more communication did you spend on that? You said you develop a shorthand. Did you find a new shorthand and start evolving from that point on, or did you find the weird cosmic bubbles, the same shorthand, replace it with this new person developing naturally?
Yeah, I mean it's a new shorthand, and yeah, we're not quite there yet because we just finished the first. We're just into the second. So I think by the end of the second, we'll have our more formalized shorthand because it just takes a while.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's okay. And even if we don't, I don't care as long as the communication is still there.
Right. Absolutely. So you had talked about earlier, conventioning is one of the most important tools for new creators to take advantage of as far as marketing themselves. What does the convention circuit look for you now that you've already finished some work in there? Do you find yourself having to do more conventions again, starting volume 2, or have you found a sustainable rhythm in conventions? Or are you one of those people who is consistently trying to burn out as much time as you can in conventions?
When I was first starting out, I was probably doing up to 20 conventions a year, maybe more. And a lot of them were small, and that was just to start building the fan base. Pre-pandemic, I pretty much realized that it wasn't cost effective anymore to spend my time. I needed to spend more time creating and less at conventions. And so I would pick and choose. And now I'm down. Well, now that it's out of the pandemic, I'm down to about 9
Okay.
or 10. And then maybe like some small things locally. And that's fine. And then I do try to get to at least one new one a year that I haven't been to before.
That's cool.
So we have a new market. Like I'm going to Baltimore Comic-Con this year.
Nice.
I've never been to the Baltimore Comic-Con. I've heard great things about it. People love indie creators. So, yeah. And, and I've done steampunk conventions. I've done TeslaCon, done stuff up and down the West Coast. Those tend to be very small.
Yeah.
So, I will go to the local ones because those are usually drivable for me.
Right.
Beyond I went to TeslaCon because my brother and sister-in-law live in Madison, Wisconsin, so I could stay.
Nice.
There you go. Yeah, absolutely.
That's why I'm trying to do was it Fayetteville Con, because I have a best friend that lives in Fayetteville.
Yes.
Yeah. So you try to do that without overstaying your welcome either.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And we keep going back to Denver. Denver's great anyway, but I have another brother-in-law who lives there. So, we go and we turn into a family trip. So we stay a few extra days and visit with family,
Right.
do the con, get on the plane and go home.
Absolutely.
So that works out. But
Is it considered a family trip if I go to England and visit Pete for a convention?
I'd say so. Yeah. So this is going to get a little more into the craft side of things. We've already been kind of going in and out throughout the our talk today, but diving in more specifically. Personally, I'm a believer that we're always learning, or we should always be trying to learn or develop new skills, educate ourselves. So in regards to your craft, it can be any element of your craft. What is a recent epiphany, skill, or process that you have developed or refined or learned something new?
Well, during the pandemic, just to keep active and creative, I started doing flash fiction.
Okay, yeah.
And I still do it. Like sometimes, like even before, like 2 or 3 days before I launched my Kickstarter, I had an idea for a story, and I said, I'm not going to be able to write for like a month because I'm doing this. So I just sat down and wrote like this 600-word story. And I have a Facebook group that they critique, and, went through their critique and sent it off to a magazine. We'll see.
There you go. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think flash fiction is a really good exercise for a writer, particularly if you're trying to sneak some, in the little small spaces, just to keep your brain going, and so that you're actually writing.
Right. Absolutely. It's a great exercise for that, but also I got my start in flash fiction before I even touched a comic script, and I 100% believe that my ability to truncate dialogue into just what is necessary and what makes good pacing comes from having worked in flash fiction. Its ability for
yeah, I'm sure it helps, and I mean, I've told a little group it's a more literary group, so sometimes me coming in with like, I have weird stuff, supernatural things, and they'll go like, okay.
Yep. Yes.
But they really enjoy it because I give critique well, and they just like, oh, okay, we like your stories, they're different.
Yes. The ongoing debate of literary versus genre work is something that amuses me to no end.
Yeah, I think it's pretty silly, but
it's pretty silly, but the people who can laugh at both sides, I think.
Yeah.
This one's good. And one of the early pieces of flash fiction I submitted to a publisher was science fiction, so it was one of those things where, and I like psychological stuff, so I'm like, okay, we're just gonna have a person going insane, finding the spaceship at the bottom of the Black Sea. And then back from the editor was like, this is different, I like it. So if you're working genre, if you get a note saying this is different, I like it, it means you're doing good. So what is some advice you'd give to creators who are newer to the space besides going to conventions and perhaps some marketing tips? What's some craft advice you'd give?
If you're brand new to comic book writing, I would suggest taking a class, whether it be online or in person, getting a solid critique group, people who give you constructive criticism and not personal. Because that's one thing you do have to learn, is to differentiate between the constructive and the personal. And even sometimes buried in the personal is something constructive. And that can be really hard sometimes, because someone will say, well, I don't like it. And it's just garble coming out of there. Nothing makes sense. But sometimes something in the back of something there might be a kernel of a truth that you need to go look at. And it's a very difficult skill set to possess. Having come from film school, I basically, got used to having my ass handed to me on a regular basis.
Yeah.
Because that's just the nature of it. Though most of the time very nicely, but still.
Yes.
But you do learn to differentiate between the two. And I almost wish that all writers went to film school so they could learn how to do this, learn how to not only give notes, but take notes.
Absolutely.
And if you're hearing the same note over and over again, if people are bumping on the same thing, then you really need to look at what they're talking about. If there's consistency in the notes, you need to address that. Then, because that's a good indicator. If more than two people are bumping on something, you need to look at it.
Absolutely.
That applies to art as well.
Yeah, I think in any creative endeavor, if you got more than two people bumping on, pick whatever it is, then yeah,
absolutely.
And you need to look at it.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to then research it and find resources outside of it to help refine on that. Chances are, if you run into a problem creating something, other people have run into that problem as well.
Oh yeah, I
Yeah.
remember I have some great beta readers for my comics, and for Spirit of Rebellion, the first iteration of that, I sent to my beta reader, and he came back, and he had all these questions, and I realized with the questions, I was like, oh, this needs a page 1 rewrite.
Yeah.
It did, because I was just trying to do too much within the space I had. I said, I need to hone this down and just really focus on one thing that is going on here. And it ended up so much better. But I could tell, like, after the third or fourth question, I'm like, yeah,
Yes.
we need to break this puppy apart and put it back together again. And people shouldn't be afraid of that, because it only makes it better.
Right.
Yes,
Absolutely.
I know it's more work, it's harder, but if it makes your work better, then it's worth it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. What was that thing Neil Gaiman said? Only after the second draft does it begin to look like you know what you're doing.
Yeah.
And even after that, it might take some more time. Okay, Jose, do you have any questions?
I have a question, and it makes I'm not trying to make it sound basic, but in regards to like the crowdfunding that you do, like as many successful ones as if you had, how soon do you promote the imminent campaign?
I usually start announcing it in my newsletter about 3 months ahead of time. And then if I'm on a show or something, I'll say like, hey, we're thinking it's going to be, and because usually I haven't nailed down the exact date yet, 3 months, just roughly, I'm like, it's probably going to be March. Not sure exactly what day,
Okay.
but March. And then probably about a month, 6 weeks out, I start arranging scheduling interviews.
Okay.
I do that. I like spend a whole day and just I'm scheduling. So I have like 24 interviews this month.
Wow.
Yeah. No, it's a great way to get the word out. I mean, that's just, it really is. And I appreciate you guys spending the time, because this is part of my job for the Kickstarter is being here with you.
Yes. Absolutely. Well, we're glad we can give you a place to shout it out and talk about the scene you've created and the fun, nerdy medium that we all love.
Right.
There you go. So that is the hour mark we've just passed. So Matt, I'll open up to you. Is there anything in particular you want to talk about as well, in addition to what we talked about today already?
Other than to let people know that Kickstarter is, we've got 15 days left. We have gone through 3 stretch goals so far. So
Wow,
there's
awesome.
there's lots of goodies for people, and there's more goodies coming. So, if you love supernatural, detective, alternate history with a little steampunk, then Boston Metaphysical is definitely for you. We actually have a very cool bookmark that's coming up. When we get to 21,000, it's a stainless steel bookmark that will be etched with the image of Tesla's experimental station in Colorado Springs.
That's
cool.
awesome.
Heck yeah.
Yeah. And then the next goal after that is to upgrade it to a copper finish.
Nice.
Yeah. So I like to find new and different things for my fans. And like we've been doing with the pins, the pins, I do a new pin every single Kickstarter. People have collections of these. And it's pretty fun. And this pin is of a Tesla coil. And Alejandro Lee designed both the pin and the bookmark.
Very cool. So yeah, if you are currently watching at home, this is the Kickstarter right here, I believe.
Yes.
And the link is also posted in all the comments. So if you're watching the VOD later, go ahead and go to or listen to us on whatever podcasting platform you prefer. Go to Kickstarter and type in Boston Metaphysical, and it'll be the first thing to pop up there. Very cool. Okay. Do you have anything else coming up? Any cons in the coming months that people need to be aware of?
Yes, I will be at WonderCon in a week and a half.
Is it Anaheim?
As in Anaheim. I will be there. I will be at a small steampunk convention in San Mateo, California called Clockwork Alchemy in April. And where's my list? I have a list.
You have to. You have to have a list.
It's
Oh yeah,
I have one. I have one back here that I've been trying to like cycle through.
Oh, I'm also doing Anacon, which is it's free. It's a small con at the Anaheim Central Library on April 15th.
very cool.
So
Nice.
if you're local, that's gonna be fun. There's gonna be a ton of really cool people there. I'll be in Phoenix in June, Fan Expo Denver, end of June, San Diego Comic-Con, Baltimore, and Rose City
So there you go.
That's cool.
in Portland.
That's up in my neck of the woods. Cool. Okay, well, we thank you for your time, and hopefully you enjoyed this conversation as much as we have.
I did. Thank you very much. Very interesting questions. I appreciate that.
We
Like I said-
appreciate you coming on here. It's super awesome.
And
Well, no, I appreciate your time and the effort you put into it. So thank you.
definitely. So if there's anything else you want to mention, we're going to be wrapping up here. But after the podcast comes down, the chat room will stay active, so we can talk at the end there. But for anyone who's watching at home or listening later, hopefully you found some of these answers informative and helpful on your own comics journey. And we'll see you next week for a subject that I have to put in the Google Calendar.
Those are always my favorite when
Yes.
you have no idea what it is.
For an hour and a half of Jose and I talking about X-Men trivia from the 90s.
That's right.
Yeah. But be sure to come back for Wednesday WAM and Silver Sunday, 8 p.m. Eastern, respectively. And Madeline, I believe you're also doing those as well.
The Sunday one, right? Doing the Sunday one.
Yes.
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 So be sure to come back Sunday for what will be a new set of questions.
Oh boy.
Yes. Hopefully they're even better. All right. So we'll see everyone next week. And till that time, make mine
Make mine Silverline.
Silverline.
I'm April Hunter. Make mine Silverline.
All right.